I can't stop thinking about this indie horror debut from a tiny 4-person development team. It somehow manages both a bittersweet story of love, loss, and faith, and a claustrophobic psychological nightmare. And like most games I obsess over, I found myself wondering how everything worked under the hood and what's happening that you can't see. Like when the game's monster appears and you run like hell without looking back because you're a giant baby. I'm talking about me, I'm the baby. How close is it actually to catching you and tearing you limb from limb? So I went back in for another playthrough with some tools to find out, and I found some stuff that was genuinely surprising, like what lurks in the darkness outside the phone booth scene that no one seems to notice. So join me down the rabbit hole and let's see what mole hides just beneath the surface. If you haven't played it yet, you may want to save this video for later since there are spoilers, and honestly, it's going to make the game less scary for you. And if I had to scream like a little girl, then you should too. You don't get off that easy. The game starts you off in the dark, with the only source of light being the dim screen of your computer terminal. It's a fixed angle and you can't really look anywhere else because everything's dark, but breaking in the free cam lets us explore the darkness and we can find almost every interactable asset in the entire game just floating out in the void. This void is where most of the game takes place, with all of these computer terminals, doors, posters, etc. mostly staying fixed in place while the map loads in and out around them. You can even find the white rabbit chilling here, which has a pretty interesting mechanic that we'll take a look at a little bit later. The darkness then gives way to a bright and airy scene in the middle of golden fields as far as the eye can see. It's a stark contrast to the cramped rooms and hallways that we'll spend the rest of the game in. And this is a good time to show you what our protagonist, Victor, looks like out of first person. It turns out that he's just the pair of legs that you see when you're looking down, along with these tiny little floating arms. It gets even sillier when you go to pick something up because the arms duplicate. So here's a 4-armed pair of legs digging up a grave, which is probably a brand new sentence never uttered by anyone. It gets even weirder watching Victor when he's on the phone, or when you notice that he's often floating just above the ground rather than touching it. When you're playing the game, you really can't notice any of this, so it's a pretty neat trick of perspective that the devs used here, as silly as it looks out of first person. Speaking of the devs, here's a fun little smiley face I left over here for nerds like me to find. Thanks, guys. Victor then wakes up inside the mysteriously quiet drilling vessel, and one of the first things he has to do is head down these stairs into the foreboding darkness below. If you're anything like me, you went nope, then turned around to make sure there wasn't anything else to do up here in the safe, comforting glow of the light. But once you do finally make your way down, it's pitch black down there and you can't see anything save for the fuse box on the wall. If we turn on the lights on the free cam, you can see part of the room isn't even loaded in. So while you're stumbling around in the dark, you're actually just steps away from the void itself. In the next area of the ship, you find that the door to the cockpit is locked, and you need to crawl through a vent to get into the room. It's a sequence that's tense and claustrophobic in first person, but really quite silly in free cam. This is where players first encounter the monster aboard the ship, though you wouldn't know it unless you look out of bounds. As you're making your way through the vent, a shadow briefly passes over the vent cover above you. Looking up, you can't actually see anything, but switching over to out of bounds, here's what happens. Yeah, the monster is just floating there in the darkness. This seems like the default spot that the monster is stored when not in use. I kept coming back here throughout the game, and it's still just suspended in the darkness, waiting to come fuck with me. Speaking of... The monster spawns inside the room just before it slams the door open and runs into a wall, before quickly recovering and chasing after you. I kinda forgot to keep Victor a safe distance away when filming this, so the monster immediately caught him, but I was surprised to see what happened next. Both Victor and the monster shrink down to this miniature size and just float there in midair. This is so the camera can get the shot before it cuts to black. It's super bizarre looking. We'll get to the next monster chase in a minute, but first I want to show you this phone booth scene. This scene's framed as a flashback to before the drill times, but there's one detail that most people don't notice, and it frames it more as another hallucination that Victor's having in his descent into insanity, instead of just a flashback. And it's right here. Don't see it? Honestly, I didn't either until I took the camera out there and found the angel floating there in the darkness, watching Victor from across the road. The angel is the entity that's guiding Victor during his time in the drill, so this is either just another hallucination or the angel has been manipulating him far longer than the story really lets on. This next stretch is where the game starts to really ratchet up the tension and where Victor's hallucinations get darker and darker. You're navigating tight hallways with tons of twists and turns when all of a sudden... Oh, there's nowhere else to go, you have to go forward, and then the hallway changes. There's suddenly a wall where there wasn't one earlier, so you head back the other way and the hall begins to change again. It's hard to describe how disorienting of an experience this is. You kind of just have to play it, but it's really interesting to see the area out of bounds as you're moving through it, because for a short time, the entire area is completely closed with no entrance or exit. It's just a blocked off hallway, so you're suddenly trapped with this thing in a small section of twisting hallways. Kinda made it scarier than when I was actually playing the game. When you get to the end though, the map changes and the monster comes after you again. You frantically get through a door, run across a bridge into a larger open area. Suddenly there's a bunch of people hanging from the ceiling. And then you're in a hallway full of doors trying to find the right one to get the hell out of here. Clearing the fog around the bridge and turning on some lights shows that the people hanging are actually your crewmates, with some of them being duplicated. It makes a lot of sense looking back at it, but it's really easy to miss when you're just running for your life. In the next area with all the doors, you're looking for door 311, which has your escape route. You are able to kick in some of the other doors, but you don't get much time to really look around since the monster's right behind you. Looking through all the rooms here shows they're all just a little bit different. They're just variations of the same thing, and yeah, it's cool to see that the devs took some time to arrange every one of them just a little bit differently. So let's break down what the monster's doing in this segment, because it's pretty interesting. Earlier when it peeks around the corner in the hallway, in Requiem you can see it's just kind of suctioned to the wall, waiting for you to get just close enough for it to despawn. And then it appears back here down this hallway, and it's nice enough to walk towards you slowly while you're frantically trying to get the door open. The second you do, it starts a full-scale sprint right towards you. And then in the hallway with all the doors are actually two parallel hallways that you can dart into to try and lose the monster, giving you just long enough to try and find the correct door. When you break line of sight, it slows down and starts walking. It's only when it sees you again that it starts running at you. Whether it can see you or not though, it's always moving towards your position, which is pretty creepy. Here you can see it coming towards me, and when I run around the other way out of sight of it, it immediately turns to begin following me. So there's really no hiding from this thing. Anyway, after you bust the right door down and crawl through a vent to escape, it teleports to you for this cutscene and then despawns. You only get a second to breathe though, because once you're out of the vent, it immediately spawns over here and starts to chase you again. Once you're safely in the cockpit, you can hear it outside sounding like it's trying to break in, but there isn't actually anything there, it's just noises to spook you. After you're done in the cockpit, the door opens and you're met with an elevator. That doesn't seem right. Anyway, you get in the elevator and it starts to move, except it actually doesn't. They do a good job of fooling you here with the camera shake and audio, but you and the elevator just stay in place while the level around you changes. It's a different approach than what's used for elevators in a lot of games, like say Resident Evil Requiem, where you're actually moved between floors, like, you know, an elevator. You now find yourself in what appears to be a hospital waiting room. After circling around from behind the desk back to where you started, there's a jump scare scene that flashes by pretty quickly, and it can be hard to make out. If we pause it here and look around, you can see more clearly that on the stretcher is a deformed, burnt-looking thing that's meant to represent Victor's son. And all around are people in various states of alarm and shock at his condition. The extra detail here, looking around at these people, swings this from straight horror into kind of a more emotional, depressing scene, which is a pretty good microcosm for the story overall, since it's a constant balance between the two. One interesting thing here though is that even though you can't normally see it, the security camera monitor behind the desk shows what's going on in the scene, indicating it's a real live camera feed and not just a static image or video. Pretty neat little detail. From here you head down another previously not there impossible hallway, and just as you round a corner, this happens.
Hell no, man. What the fuck, man?
I genuinely found this area to be one of the scariest in the game. The creepy hospital hallways made me long for the cramped but familiar industrial interior of my drilling machine. The burn boy rounds the corner and instantly despawns, but it's not the last time we see him. As we get to the sort of lounge area and watch some TV, we suddenly see a camera feed from behind us, and the burned boy walks right up and stands behind Victor before the screen cuts to black. And let me tell you, turning around after that sucked. The boy isn't there, but you can tell something's not quite right, since as you move through the hallways, you constantly hear footsteps. The sound design is impeccable because you can never quite tell where they're coming from. One second it sounds like it's behind you, the next it's far away. It's pretty disorienting and had me just sprinting through most of this part out of anxiety. The burned boy never does show up though, and flying around with the camera shows he's really nowhere to be found. Now, you may be wondering what's in all the other rooms in these halls, but unfortunately there's not much to show. They're mostly just these empty, tiled liminal spaces, which I guess are kind of creepy in their own right. Soon after, you find yourself in another hallucination/flashback, this time in the burning apartment building where Victor tried but failed to save his son. As I was playing through this, I remember this building feeling huge, like way bigger than anything else in the game so far. And looking out of bounds seems to confirm that. The map looks to be a lot physically larger and more spread out than anywhere else in the game so far. We then get this strange, serene moment of calm where we come across a white rabbit, a representation of the entity or white rabbit signal that we've been drilling towards this whole time. You can never quite catch up to it, it always stays just out of reach, and moving closer with the camera and slowing the scene down, you can see it's actually just a series of 2D sprites, and the hopping it does is just an illusion, as the sprite just moves in a straight line towards its destination. It also looks exactly the same from both the back and front. I really love what they did with this thing. It's got this sort of ethereal quality to it that's hard to place in normal play, so it's pretty cool to see how it works up close. This serene moment is short-lived though, as we come out of the cave and onto a beach, and then immediately sink into the murky water. Clearing the fog here, we can get an early look at what's coming for us. This weird, giant, fleshy fish monster. What really surprised me though is that there's actually 2 of them. I went back and played it again with the fog and could just barely make it out, but I completely missed it the first time. The other thing I noticed here is how bright the light from the fish's mouth is with the fog cleared, which matches nicely with the dialogue from the entity saying, "Follow my light." In the church scene that follows, there actually isn't a whole lot to see out of bounds, but I thought I'd point out some of the frescoes painted up on the ceiling in case you missed them, because they are actual religious references that are relevant to this story. This one depicts Abraham from one of the Sacrifice of Isaac paintings by Caravaggio, and then we have 2 early Christian martyrs, Saint Agatha of Sicily and Saint Sebastian. In fact, the whole story here is rooted in Christianity, and it's a pretty deep rabbit hole to go down, but maybe I'll save that for another video if folks are interested. The next area has one of my favorite discoveries in the game, but let's take a quick look first at the scene leading up to the next monster chase. First is this area that looks kind of like the church we were just in, and turning up the lights show that it's actually the same model, complete with the same frescoes up on the ceiling. And after a quick jog through a creepier version of the hospital, we end up back at the hospital room of Victor's son, Petro, though it looks maybe a little different. Grabbing the fuse you need here triggers this fun jump scare. And now we're back on the run. This chase takes you through the trippiest part of the game, and there's a hallway that warps around you as you travel through it. Taking a look at it out of bounds gets even trippier because it warps in relation to where the camera is, and not necessarily where Victor is. I spent a ton of time just flying back and forth watching this thing react to movement. Then there's also a whole section here that you never see in game. It's Victor's apartment, but turned completely upside down. I wondered why this got cut, because it would have been pretty fun to run through for this sequence, but maybe they just couldn't make it work. As you reach the end of the run and dive into an elevator, the monster despawns from wherever it was and teleports to you for this scene. And now we re-enter the more familiar deck of the drill machine for the final confrontation with the monster. It spawns in around this corner and... well, that's the end of that. The final stretch of the game has you entering another drill machine that was lost years ago, right next to the source of the White Rabbit signal. There's a few interesting things out of bounds here, like these massive crystal formations, and there's also the cassette containing Petro's soul that teleports into your hands in a little bit. And then you can see the credit screens from the terminals here all layered on top of one another, just sort of glitching out. There's writing from the other terminals too that are duplicated on the outside for some reason. Lastly, there's another fuse box out here that doesn't seem to have been used for anything. Not sure what it was meant for, but maybe the devs originally had more planned for this last scene that they decided to cut. Unfortunately, this is where Victor meets a grim end, essentially being martyred so that the angel or entity or rabbit or whatever it is can unleash itself upon the world. The next scene finds us back in Victor's apartment, and outside you can see a bunch of skyscrapers and this little warp portal that we're about to walk into. We're then transported back to the fields from earlier, except now they're lush and green, and Petro's there waiting for Victor. We can swing the camera around here and get a good look at his face, which you never really see in game except for his ID picture, which, putting them side by side, I guess it's kind of accurate. I thought they just made it creepy on purpose. A nice little end cap to the scene here shows us the dev smiley face is still here. Aw, thanks guys. The final scene shows the aftermath of Victor's actions. Moving around the recorded segments in the drill machines doesn't show us much that we can't already see, but you can see that behind a locked door, one of the crew's bodies has a little crime scene number card next to it. And then outside the office where Maria is reviewing the footage, shows it's just a small room floating in space with the apartment building outside for effect. And that's where the game ends, and that's Mole. If you haven't played it yet, definitely check it out. The story is genuinely very well written, and it's right up there with Resident Evil Requiem for one of my favorite horror games of the year. It's really incredible that such a small team pulled this off on their first try, and I look forward to seeing what they're going to do next with it. If there's anything I didn't show that you were curious about, let me know in the comments. There's some stuff I didn't include for pacing reasons, so chances are I've got an answer for you. As always, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.